And thank you all for coming in. Marcelo, thank you for coming to see us and sitting down with me for about 10 minutes, they tell me. Not in 10 minutes, but in about 10 years, or just under 10 years at SoftBank, my guest, Marcelo Claure, created around $60 billion of value for SoftBank. And he tells me that while at SoftBank, he got a little bit frustrated because they were investing about $1 billion a week, and very little of that was going to Latin America. And so SoftBank looked down the sofa and found some $8 billion and directed that to Latin America to make about an 85% return on that. Marcelo left, of course, SoftBank a few months ago.
Yes.
And has left many wondering what his next move is. Marcelo, I know that you are bullish on Latin America. In the interest of time, I'm just going to cut right through to the chase. What is the reality of Latin America becoming the new manufacturer for the world, replacing China?
So I think Latin America in that regard is incredibly well positioned, as we've seen in the geopolitical situation that we live today, out of which manufacturing cannot continue to be mainly sourced in China, and we see that a lot of companies are basically diversifying the way they procure, the way they manufacture, and then due to the proximity of Latin America to an important market like the US, suddenly Latin America will become an important place for supply chain, for manufacturing, for many goods. So from that end, I think it's definitely a tailwind for Latin America, the proximity to the US and a pretty stable economy. So it was hard to believe that traditionally Latin American economies were the ones that were regarded as hyperinflation, and Latin America for the first time was the first one to actually raise interest rates, where the currencies today are have not been battered like other currencies against the dollar. So I think Latin America is in a really good position as it relates to the future. One of the few times in the history of Latin America that I would say from a macro perspective is in a very good situation right now.
It does bring, I mean, the word Latin America does conjure up images of corruption, currency devaluations, political instability, inflation, and so on. I know you've just addressed that a little while, but how do you consolidate that into an investment decision?
So we look at Latin America as a place of opportunity. It was probably the place in the world that had the lowest percentage of investments, of investment in technology companies and others against GDP. So that's why we thought it was a great opportunity. When you go back to Latin America in 2018, the total amount of venture investing was $1 billion. We deployed $9 billion a year later, and then today, Latin America in 2021, we had the most successful year with over $25 billion of capital being invested into Latin America, and for that, you've developed some pretty amazing companies. Few people know that the largest and most successful digital bank in the world was a bank that started in Brazil, a bank called Nubank. That probably one of the most well-known health and wellness companies, a Brazilian company called Gympass. Probably one of the best renter companies, a company called Quinto Andar, and so on. We can continue to provide, really good examples. And from that end, I think Latin America has a lot of opportunity. It has challenges, like other parts in the world. But I think when you look at the potential reward versus risk, I think Latin America is in a very good situation.
But there are challenges on both sides. On the one side, protectionism is a long-standing modus operandi for a lot of Latin American countries, not least of which Mexico, for example. And on the other side, trade agreements with the US remain, keep the barriers of trade quite high.
And I think so. If you look at Mexico, Mexico has enjoyed a free trade agreement with the US. And Mexico is probably, one of the largest suppliers to the US, so from that end. And then you look at Brazil. Brazil traditionally has been a protectionist economy, but on the positive side of Brazil, Brazil has a size. I mean, by 2050, it's expected to be in the top 6 economies in the world. So Brazil is a country in which you do local manufacturing to supply to Brazil, and Brazil had been an exporter. So I think from that end, I think a lot of markets are opening up. And the fact that US is the main trading partner of Mexico, that definitely puts, Latin America. And I would say that in this divided world that we're living today, the US is paying a lot more attention to Latin America. And I think Latin America is going to be a really good trading partner of the US and a lot of the Western economy.
Brazil is coming up to a presidential election this weekend. What do you think? Anything that might threaten change the investment environment at the moment?
So I think Brazil has been in a very good trajectory, and I think whoever of the two presidents that get elected, you know, if Bolsonaro were to get elected, I think they will continue with the same trend of privatization and bringing private enterprises to control, you know, to take over and manage a lot of the state-owned enterprises. That has proven to be very successful. And even if Lula were to get elected, you know, he will not have control of the Congress or Senate. So in this case, I would think it's going to be somewhere more in the center. So I think overall, you know, like I said, I remain incredibly bullish in Brazil and bullish in Latin America. There's also another factor that's very important. Traditionally, Latin America has been a commodities market. And you know, you look at the prices of commodities today, in many cases they're on an all-time high, and I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. So suddenly you have a stable currency, you have governments that have been proactive at raising interest rates before the whole world raised interest rates. You have a controlled economy, and in addition, you have commodities at an all-time high. You know, few people know that, you know, in Latin America alone, what is called the Golden Triangle between Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, 65% of the world's lithium reserves sit over there. And as we're living in the midst of potentially one of the biggest technology changes, which means the electrification of mobility, you know, I think Latin America is going to be incredibly well positioned as the largest supplier of lithium to the world, plus nickel, plus copper, and all that. So those things that traditionally were not I would say, fashionable, today they're a necessity in order to propel the electric revolution.
So post-COVID, fintech was a huge opportunity in Latin America. Commodities are presenting a future opportunity. Where else are these opportunities, both sectorially and geographically, amongst the countries of Latin America?
I think there's a lot, right? I mean, even thought, you know, when you look at fintech, Latin America remains with one of the lowest penetrations of bank accounts. I mean, when you look at a market like Mexico, less than 50% of the population actually have a bank account. We still people transacting cash, so that presents an incredible opportunity to get fintechs that will propel the fast adoption of financial services. So that has been incredibly good. We've talked about commodities being something that's going to be quite important. And then more importantly, I would say manufacturing and supply chain. Right, you're having a lot of that move. So when you have those three tailwinds, I think it's going to be positive as it relates to the future of making Latin America, I wouldn't say, you know, the premier place to invest, but traditionally Latin America were a place where people did not invest, and now suddenly it becomes, you know, I would say an attractive place for companies, for investment companies to have a diversified portfolio and to take into consideration Latin America.
So where are you investing?
So we're investing in a lot, right? And we're, you know, obviously, you know, I'm incredibly keen in lithium. You know, as Bolivia, my home country, controls 1/3 of the world's lithium, which is the first time ever that a country like Bolivia is #1. So we're very excited as it relates to lithium. We are excited about bringing electric vehicles into Latin America. So we're contemplating potentially opening factories throughout Latin America of electric two-wheelers and four-wheelers, and continue our investment in funds. There's a lot of exciting funds being formed there's just so much opportunity. I always say when there's so many things are broken, you know, traditional Latin American lacks in education, in health, in all the areas that technology is going to help fix. I think there's a lot of, you know, great momentum to potentially continue to invest in funds that will invest in technology companies.
They tell me time is up, but I have one more question. You're a great company operator, a business operator, obviously. You're a great investor as well, and you're a great fan of football. So what are your plans for Club Boulevard?
So I own Bolivia's largest team, and they continue to win. It's very good. We own a team in Spain, which is also in first division. So I think it's always fun to keep the competitive edge on that.
Are we going to see them in the World Cup?
Well, hopefully Bolivia will make it to the World Cup next round. It's difficult when you compete against Argentina and Brazil.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. Thank you all for attending.